5:30. Ready to go, Jim? All right, going to call the Municipal Building Commission meeting of February 7th, 2024 to order at 5:30 p.m. And for the record, in addition to myself, we have Terry DeSisto, Ed Stanton, Jackie Romanicki, Jerry Freecott, Peter Gagney, Andrew Acosta maybe a few minutes late. We'll get to our guest of the evening, Courtney Allen, in a minute, but first we should approve the minutes from January 3rd, 2024. Is there a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Courtney, are you with us? We can't.
I am.
Oh, okay. Good. All right, what's happening with your projects?
Okay, would we like to do Pawtucket or PFAS first?
Why don't you do Pawtucket?
Okay. Excuse me, sorry. Last time we spoke, we were talking that there was going to be a couple change orders coming down the pipe. The first wasn't necessarily a change order, but related to the other one. We had spoke about the potential for maybe moving the station from the original proposed site that was bid. That did not happen, so instead we changed the piping plan. And the pipe is now on order. The total for that was just over $42,000 for the pipe. It's on order with a lead time of about a week.
Mm-hmm.
The change order that you see in front of you includes the labor for Waterline Industries to go and actually move the pipe itself. And the number on that, I believe, was 77.1.
So is that 70, does that 77 include the 42 for the pipe and it's 35 for labor, or is it 77 for labor plus 42 for the pipe?
77 for labor and 42 for the pipe.
Okay, so do we have a change order for ordering the pipe, or was that coming out of some other part mason?
Right, so the pipe is ultimately being procured through the city, right, through the same funding source, but this was bid out.
City's gonna buy it directly.
Correct, so we're procuring
under
the
the-
supplies and then procuring the labor through the existing contract we have. So if you'll remember, the labor was originally supposed to be done by Pawtucket.
Yep.
And we were always gonna be the purchaser of the supplies. And then, as Courtney's discussed before, that sort of
Yeah.
fell through. So we're the change orders for that labor, and again, we're still moving forward with procuring the materials. Those bid results came in on January 17th. The low bidder was Joan Hadley and Sons at $44,240.
Oh, so we actually bid the.
We actually bid, yes.
Okay, so it wasn't one of those regular procurement contracts.
No.
Okay. All right, good. Gail Clark is present for the record. And so, Gail, we were just discussing change order number 1 for Attleboro, Pawtucket, which is for $77,000 to install the pipe that the city is buying because the Pawtucket Water Supply Board cannot perform that. And we did discuss this at the last meeting. That, I guess, is there anything else going on with that project, Courtney?
There is. There's 2 other items you're going to see on this change order. Number 2 is actually a credit, and this is for an isolation valve for the station. What was originally on the plans was a globe-style valve. The back order and the lead times on this style of valve really hasn't come down. What CDM proposed, and it's okay with us, is a wafer-style valve. It'll do the same thing as the intended valve, but it's in stock. The contractor can buy it off the shelf. So that one's actually a credit of $608, which we always like to see.
Yes, we do. So we don't have that change order number 2 yet?
It's part of the same change order. So this includes, so the first item was the labor that we just discussed, the $71,711.25. The second item is that deduct of $608 for the
Okay.
valve, and then there's also a third item that Courtney will explain as well.
Okay, so I see now that the piping labor was 71,711,
Correct.
And now we're subtracting the $600 credit on the valve.
Correct.
Okay, and is there something else then, Courtney?
There is, and this is related to fire protection in the attic space, top of the station. Excuse me. It's an unheated space, so I mean, there were a couple of options here. We could have either opened up the space and heated it, which means we would, own heating this space in perpetuity for as long as the station's there. Or we could move to a dry system. So basically, so that it wouldn't freeze. So this is for increased sizing of the backflow preventer and some dry heads for the area in the space above the pumps. And the cost for this one was $6,000.09.
And we probably would spend that $6,000 fairly quickly over the first few years heating this area,
We
right?
could spend it in a couple of years for sure.
So it seems to make a lot of long-term sense then. Okay, so as I understand it now, then the piping work is 71,711. The credit for the check valve is 608, and then we're adding 6,009 cents to change to the dry system, giving us a total of 77,103.34 for the entire change order, consisting of 3 items.
That's right.
Okay. Forgive me, sometimes I get old and slow. All right, then, do we have any questions for Courtney or Mason concerning this change order number 1? Hearing none, a motion's in order to approve.
Move to approve. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries. Okay, is there anything else we need to discuss on this particular project?
Not as so far. There is, if you drive by the site, it's kind of in a buried area, but if you do drive by, you will see some work out there. That is the gas company moving the main. That's not the actual contractor doing any site work yet.
Okay.
For the contractor, we're looking at a start of the spring, again, weather dependent. And the station itself, we're actually seeing better and better lead times. The new estimate for when the station may be available to the contractor would be April of '24. And if you remember when we were, when Matt Petter and I were down last summer, we were still expecting the station to be late into the fall for delivery, so this is good news.
So does that mean that the project will finish that much quicker? Or does it not mean that?
Well, the proposed finish time was spring of '25. It could be by the end of the year if everything falls into place with the lead times.
Okay, that sounds good.
Fingers crossed.
Okay. Mason?
Courtney, so when you say completed by the end of the year, but is the system will actually be online this summer? Is that what I'm understanding from prior conversations?
It won't be this
Okay.
summer.
Okay.
It could be much later this year, but again, we were initially looking at, I believe it was May or June of '25. So that could be expedited a little bit because the lead time's coming down.
So we might get 5 or 6 months ahead of that earlier
Maybe.
projected time.
Is there any testing that would have to happen though this summer, like during the summer season at all?
No.
Okay.
So, but on terms of testing, we must have to turn this thing on at some point to make sure it works, right?
Right, they do, like at the manufacturer, they'll do, pressure testing of the valves, things like that, making sure everything works, before it ships off site. After that point, when it shows up at site for the install, there's not much we can do, on our end for testing until it's actually connected to both systems.
Okay. All right, any other questions on this project? And I guess we can move on to PFAS.
We have to vote for that?
What?
Do we have to vote to approve?
We voted to,
We just did.
change order.
Okay.
we approved change
We just
order number
did, okay.
1,
All right.
and I don't see that we have any bills from the contractor,
Okay.
so I think we're done with that one. Mason, it says budget update. Is there any update on that on the budget?
The budget update was just kind of involved with the change order. Obviously, the increase in the project cost is that that change order.
Yeah.
In discussions with Courtney, we don't foresee other change orders, but potentially things can happen when you get out there on site. So we're having further discussions. As people might remember, a big significant portion of this project was ARPA funded, and so right now there is within that project fund there's ARPA funds that are not under contract. So we have to figure out essentially, are there going to be other change orders? Because we need to figure out moving those funds so that we don't lose them before the end of the calendar year in the case that there's not going to be additional costs for this project.
So if
sort of
we
the short-
actually finish this by the end of the calendar year, then that will make your life easier.
Yeah. So ideally, we would know this summer, early summer, if there's going to be any other additional change orders when they actually get the delivery in April and potentially get out on site to actually start construction, because these funds have to be obligated by the end of the calendar year. So moving them for another purpose needs to happen before then. So.
Okay, good, excellent. And Andrew Costa has joined us. So, moving along then to PFAS.
Wading River.
Okay, for temporary PFAS, again, this is the temporary 1 MGD, I'm sorry about that. The temporary 1 MGD PFAS treatment, it's still expected to be in place sometime in July of '24. Everything's on order for that. You will start seeing invoicing from the contractor for that project relatively soon. For the permanent plant, I do have some news since last time we met. We've been meeting with Tater and Howard, who is the engineer on the project. And basically they sent an RFI to us this afternoon, and it's basically what we prefer for brands and materials for, valves, chemical pumps, tanks, that sort of thing, for the new plant when we get there. But what we have from them right now is the proposed treatment train. Again, it ended up being 3 rounds of piloting, 2 pilot tests over the summers and 1 in the winter. And it was for TOC removal, which is related to the THMs out in the system, manganese, and for PFAS. Our treatment trains, what we're looking at right now is the head of the plant would be a MIEX resin system. And what this is, it's an ion exchange resin system. And it's capable of removing TOC. TOC is a precursor to the THMs that we have problems out in the system with when Wading River is running. This process and piloting was capable of removing 61 to 67% of TOC. Again, TOC is organic carbon. You're never going to remove 100% of it. To give some comparison of what 61 to 67% looks like, that's generally a little bit better than we get at West Street, which is a full-fledged treatment plant. Excuse me. So the numbers we're looking at there are favorable. Again, when we get to THMs, our limit out in the system is, for an annual average, it's 80 parts per billion. We were seeing numbers higher than that just at Wading River during summers when it was online. So these are very good numbers that they're proposing. The second treatment in the treatment process would be green sand filtration. This is basically exactly like you think of like a pool filter or a filter that we have at West Street, except it's green sand instead of carbon. What green sand is it's sand treated with a strong oxidant. So basically when you have the water move through the filters, it gets basically ionized. It ends up almost like rusted, and it turns the metals into a solid so they can be filtered out. Green sand is an effective treatment. It's used all over the place in New England and Massachusetts for iron and manganese removal. And what Tater and Howard saw in the pilot was that for our water, it's capable of removing the manganese down to less than 0.05 parts per million. which is under the secondary level set by EPA. So again, that's very promising numbers. The last treatment process that would be added to the plant would be carbon-resin filtration for PFAS. Again, you have, at this point, you have most of your organic carbon out of the water, your metals should be completely gone, and you have basically a crystal clear water that has essentially nothing left but PFAS. So it's the last thing we grab. The reason that this is last in the plant is it is a pricey process. Basically what it'll end up being is parallel trains of 2 filters in series. So you would have filter number 1, and then that the water goes through first, filter number 2, that the water would go through second. Once the PFAS breaks through filter number 1, that filter comes offline, the resin or the media gets replaced, and filter number 2 takes the lead, and filter number 1, when it comes back after the media replacement, would become filter number 2. So they end up kind of rotating through. And the media gets taken off place, either for regeneration, which means they heat it to high temperatures and destroy everything that was in it, PFAS, or it gets landfilled. And this is similar to what we do with our filters at West Street. We're working on a pricing revision right now. I hope to have it in the next day or 2. It's not far off of anything we've seen before. Tater and Howard is working on annual estimates of operation costs for that plant, and that should be somewhat finalized with an estimate before our next meeting. And again, I say estimate because it is going to be hard to tell until the plant is actually operational. What we'll see for either chemical doses or what we'll see for how often the filters need to be turned over. Piloting suggests these filters should last about 18 months before we have to either regenerate them or landfill media. And it's going to depend what we actually see in the real world at full scale. It could be anywhere from 1 year to 2 years that these last. So the last thing that we'd spoken about, I believe, with PFAS last time we met, was that there was going to be a public hearing on January 31st regarding the intended use plans for SRF funding. The intended use plan list was released by the state in late December. We were ranked number 5 out of eligible plans of about, I believe it was 30. If it was a different number, you can correct me, Mason, but it was around there. We were ranked at number 5, which is very, very promising for funding. I attended the public hearing, and the city, basically I drafted public comment to put in support of the project, and it was received by the state. The next steps for that is securing the remaining funding that is not SRF eligible through a council vote for a loan order, and then basically we keep rolling through design, which has to be completed by October 15th to stay eligible for funding.
At the last meeting, you mentioned needing an owner's project manager. Do we still need to pursue that?
I believe we do.
So therefore, I would suggest that you're going to want to talk to Mason about putting together an RFQ, if that's the right term, Mason, for an OPM for this project, and we should get that done. Well, we aren't all that busy right now, because we know that requires us to evaluate, shortlist, and interview, so there is some time that it takes with that. So if you and Mason could follow through on that, we can schedule that for some time not too far down the road, and that would be one where we probably want you to be here in person for the interviews. And generally, we try to interview the top 3 candidates.
Okay.
And, but despite having an OPM on board, Tata and Howard is still gonna be the design professional firm, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. It sounds like we're making progress on this important issue.
Yes, we are.
Good, good. Anybody have any questions?
No?
Anything, Mason?
Just one question. So, Courtney, you had talked about the pricing revision. I know we've talked about this previously, but is any part of that work that Tata is doing right now include other operational costs, like additional personnel costs, things that might be needed to serve or operate an additional plant?
Basically what Tater and Howard is looking at is just additional O&M costs, things like spare parts, chemicals, electricity, heat. There is going to be, additional waste removal at the site. We don't have sewer, so it will be pumping out of septic, things like that. There is going to be, relative to the carbon removal, there is going to be on-site lagoons at the new plant that will need periodic cleaning out, things like that. For personnel, we do not have an answer from the state on whether or not this site will have to be manned yet. Currently, Wading River, even when it's operational, only requires a visit for a certified operator once a day. The operator goes in, checks all the chem pumps, checks for, leaks, runs residuals on the water, takes chemical deliveries, that sort of thing. We're only required once a day. Right now, we visit it 3 times a day, whether it's running or not. And we can do that with current staff.
Courtney, does that plant communicate like over the internet with the main plant? Is that something you monitor from the main plant as well as sending someone up there?
Yes, we monitor it 24/7. West Street is manned 24/7 with shifts of 2 or more operators, one of who stays in the control room at all times. We can see Wading River, we monitor it, we can actually control it from West Street. If there are issues, we can shut the plant down from West Street and all that will stay. Right now, with the state, the current plant is rated at a grade 2 treatment, which is, it basically just states that it's a really simple operation up there. What we're gonna see is closer to West Street. So it is questionable if the state is going to allow us to leave that unmanned. It sounds like likely not. It could be anywhere between unmanned all the way up to 24 hours a day. So I have estimates on additional personnel that will be needed. There is going to be some maintenance personnel needed. I estimate 2. Right now we have a maintenance staff of 4. Basically, we have the general foreman position, and then we have a couple laborers in maintenance, and then we have somebody that basically handles the watershed. What we're looking at is likely a laborer and a mid-foreman position that are housed at the new plant at Wading River. Because again, right now we don't have much of a plant. And we're looking at something that's going to be on a smaller scale, but the equipment level of what we see at West Street. So we're going to need somebody to work on and maintain it. For the operators, again, it could be anywhere between leaving it unmanned as it is now, all the way up to it needs to be manned 24/7. So we're looking at likely 2 to 5 operators. With what's being proposed at that plant, it's likely to be a grade 4 plant, which, as Massachusetts goes, DEP doesn't like to leave them unmanned. Excuse me. And with the processes there that are being proposed, I don't think it's a good idea to leave it unmanned all the time either. So we're looking potential of 5 operators, at a grade 3 or higher for their license level. And I've spoke to Mason, I've also spoke to the mayor and to personnel, about the potential of getting, once we know what we're going to need there for operations staffing, bringing these folks in earlier and getting them through the licensing in-house so that they're ready when the plant's online. Right now, it takes me about 2 years to make a grade 3 operator. So with the potential date of the plant coming online in late 27, I can't really hire them that summer. We don't have time to get them ready. So probably late 25, I would have to start bringing in the new staff. And we'll have a better answer on how many by then.
Okay. Mason, where will the money come from to pay the OPM?
For the OPM, so we'll have to look at that. I believe the way the SRF funding works, I believe, so Courtney earlier said the authorization for the remaining funds, but my understanding is it's actually the full cost of the project still has to be authorized by the city, and then the borrowing, that $15 million borrowing would happen through the SRF, and the remaining would be through the city. So I believe it would still be all part of that financing. But again, just clarity on that piece from earlier, it would be a full, this project was estimated at $335,181,000. So that would, I believe that would be the scope of the authorization.
And when do you think that's likely to get sent down to the council?
Likely in the next few months. We're working on that. We've been working on that sort of on a daily basis this last week.
Well, the only reason I ask that is
Right.
that if we put something out on the street and we want to hire somebody and we go through the interview process, I think it's only fair that we have a source to sign a contract.
Right. And there's certain deadlines we have to meet with the SRF funding that we're still working. We have a meeting coming up, I believe on the 22nd was scheduled today, Courtney? I think it was
I
scheduled.
believe so.
Yeah, I think we finalized a meeting with some representatives from the SRF. So we're meeting with them later this month and kind of working through some of the mechanics of this. So, still developing, but again, it's early stages, but there are deadlines throughout this calendar year that we have to hit. So we're working through that.
Yes, I'm just thinking that if you put something on the street in March and things were due in April and we interviewed in May, would that be too soon, in terms of having funding in place to sign a contract? Or just trying to think ahead.
Right, at this point, I mean, it may be that it has to be seeded through some other funding source to have an OPM if we're trying to have an OPM in place at that time. Again, we have to talk with SRF what the needs are for the project and what their expectations are. So we're working through that over the next month.
Okay. 35 million.
Expensive project. PFAS is expensive.
Just for my clarity, so estimated 35 million for the construction. 15 of it could be funded from SRF. The other approximate 20 comes from ratepayers or taxes, or
Right.
what is
So
that?
any borrowing that's for the water enterprise is ultimately going to fall onto the rate. That debt service would be absorbed onto the rate. We are going through a rate study right now, and we've been looking at we're actively going through it with a vendor right now, and we've been looking at how we deal with debt in our rate model. One of the things that the city's hasn't really done a good job of in the past is actually planning for debt in the future on the rate. We've sort of our model has just been pay for the current year debt service on the rate, which means, if you have big projects that come in all at once, it can result in massive rate increases. So trying to look at the capital improvement plan, look at the projects that are coming up and spreading out those rate increases over the span of the projects and potentially planning for those years ahead. But it is true that any sort of debt service that comes on is going to be has to be on the rate, or at some point, if the enterprise fund can't pay the bill, can't foot the bill, it falls to the general fund. So it's ultimately the responsibility of the city.
And the same goes with the future maintenance of it, because it'll be
Right.
extra.
Right, exactly.
So the fund is just a portion of it, and it's just for the construction.
Right, correct.
And is the SRF, is that a 0% loan?
So that's, Courtney, I believe there's potential for no interest financing as well as actual loan forgiveness, is my understanding. We don't know the extent of that. It might be all the way up to the full amount, but I'm not sure we know the extent of that yet.
We do not yet. It's anywhere from, I believe the highest interest rate on it was 2%, which is way, way better than market right now. But there is the potential for 0% or complete forgiveness on the PFAS portion. But we do not know that yet. And the timeline, I believe the timeline Tater and Howard provided to us, we might know that by the fall.
I mean, I understand we're not the only ones dealing with this issue. I'm sure every community is, but a $35 million bill dumped on the ratepayers is significant, would
Yeah.
you say?
Absolutely.
And so if the state government can help us either with a very low interest rate or by forgiving the money, assuming we accurately complete the project, I would hope we'd get some help. But I'm sure that every community around here is hoping for the same thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a problem across the country. I mean, Courtney, we've talked about this a lot with the sort of moving targets on, the thresholds for these chemicals.
Yeah.
It's all across the country, these costs are going up because everybody's having to deal with these same problems. So, I mean, it's something Courtney and I have talked about a lot.
What about,
Right, and again, I mean, we're unfortunate in a way that we found it. We are fortunate with our ranking that we got with the SRF because most of the public hearings that I attended last week was departments, communities, or smaller systems basically trying to argue their way on the list, those that didn't get ranked at all. So I mean, we have a good start, but again, it's not an infinite well of money. There's over 100 communities in Massachusetts alone that are out of compliance with PFAS. And that number is actually skewed a little bit low because technically right now, because we're not running Wading River, we are in compliance. So that number, and there's other communities that had to do that too, take a plant or a well field offline. So that number is actually much higher than what the state is representing on who's having problems with this.
okay, and what about the litigation? Is there any role that any litigation settlements are playing in this, Mason? Do you know?
I don't know on terms of the SRF side, but there's PFAS litigation going on throughout the country. That's something Courtney's been working on with the city solicitor. I don't want to speak on anything that that legal's working on because I don't know the details. I don't want to misrepresent something, but I know that's obviously something we've looked at as a city, and our legal department's been looking at.
So there is.
Yeah, we are actively looking. We are actually working with an outside firm. The results of our efforts aren't public record as of yet. Hopefully we can share soon what we're looking at there.
The reason I bring it up is just that in the event that there are class action settlements and we do get some money, I would assume that would defray some of the cost. Certainly we're not gonna get $35 million.
No, we're not.
But there is the potential for helping the ratepayers if there is money that 3M or some of these other companies pay, right?
Right. I don't know what that would look like, except that, we've seen in recent years with the opioid settlement funds, right, those funds have, come into the city and across the country. They've been, they have to be specifically for purposes related to the settlement. I don't know if that's what this looks like. I don't know if, the city's going to get anything. I just, that's what I would assume. I would assume that's how these cases are being structured, but I really don't know. It's, again, that's legal, not me. That's really just what I'm reading, so, in the news, so.
Okay. Anything else, Courtney?
I think that's it.
Anything?
Just want to, rank number 5, how did Attleboro get that ranking? What was taken into consideration?
There's a couple things they don't, the state doesn't give you complete specifics on how they came up with the ranking. They basically kind of refer to it as needs-based. So, my thoughts on the high ranking is we've been without a plant. And I believe I've talked permits and withdrawal permits for the plants with MBC before. if I haven't, or you weren't on NBC yet, we have a total withdrawal permit between the two plants of 5.85 million gallons a day. That's a little, and that's average over the course of the year. It's less than our typical summer day. 3.85 million gallons a day belongs to West Street. The other 2 million belongs to Wading River. And the two permits do not mix. So basically what we have going on right now with Wading River down is we've lost a third of our water, a third of our permitted water. So that's part of our need, even with the rain last summer and then the full out restrictions the summer before. We were over permit at West Street by average over the course of the year between 400,000 and 500,000 gallons per day. So the reservoir system really can't take it. So, you know, we're in rough shape without our plant, and it needs to get done. They don't seem to look at, how can I put this, ability of the community to fund it. So you won't find small or rural or underserved communities ranking higher because of that. You will find that they're more likely to get forgiveness and things like that if you have a lower income community, or, you know, there's some communities that are running into this where they have to build a similar plant that we do, but they only have 10,000 ratepayers to pay for it instead of, you know, around the 50,000 that we have. So they take that into account for their rates and their forgiveness, but not necessarily their ranking, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I do know that if you go on mass.gov and you look at the draft IEPs that were released in December, some of the information on how they're calculating that and potentially where they're putting preferences included in the draft IEP. It's about 36 pages for the drinking water IUP.
But specific to system, they don't really
Right.
have it listed.
Right. Some of it's, you know, again, some of it's like there's certain points for like the goal. They don't really give like a formulaic version. It's kind of says like the goals of the projects, the accomplishments, and then there's like things for the community, and there's all these different piece qualifiers that are sort of put on it. So it's not necessarily clear, but there's some details there.
Okay. No, I was just concerned that maybe it was because of the amount of PFAS in the system, or
Which I don't think that is actually
I don't-
part of it
Yeah,
at
I
all.
don't think they took it into account at all. I think, basically, as soon as you're out of compliance, whether that number is 21 or whether that number is 101, it's still out of compliance and you still need to do some treatment.
So it sounds like we ranked high because we have a lot of people who use our water. That seems like what I heard you say.
We have a lot of need for this plant to be running, yes.
So, okay. Any other questions? All right, then we don't have to take any votes on this. And thank you for your time, Courtney. And our next meeting is the 6th.
I think we have one invoice.
Oh, we got to pay the bill. But I was just going to tell her that our next meeting is, that we'll see you at, is March 6th. And I think it is likely that we will be at the high school for that night, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But if we'd still have you being able to be remote.
Okay,
Okay, so thank you.
thank you.
All right, we have a bill for port construction for the police roof for $3,450. That bill's in order, Mason?
It is. So this project is essentially just going through final closeout. We're waiting. One of the warranties, we're still waiting on one of the warranties, so we did not want to do any sort of final billing until that warranty was in hand. So
So
really
we don't
the
have a
only-
bill from the contractor, that's why,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So we expect that at the next meeting, unless there's some other delay on it, but we expect that at the next meeting at this point. Same goes for the Willett roof project as well. There's just not warranty information, but just some final closeout pieces that we're working through, and we're expecting it in March, so for the next few weeks.
And in terms of the additional work on Willett, where are we on that?
So we have a meeting on, it's today Wednesday, I believe it's Friday, with Socotec and Skanska on the window wall work, which is
That we already own.
that we already own. In when we say own, it's under contract. The contract administration for Socotec, as well as contract administration, on-site coverage, and close out with Skanska or OPM. So that work we're hoping to bid out potentially over the next month or two, so we can get a little bit better price now before that season kicks up, and then that would be work completed this summer. Broader perspective on Willett, there's the school's working towards the HVAC project over there. They did get approval to be able to use their ESSER funds towards that project, so they're working through the procurement side of that. And that's going to be a relatively involved project this summer, so we don't anticipate being able to do additional like envelope and window repairs this summer at Willett. It'll probably likely be the following summer. So we're looking at kicking off a larger envelope repair project over there to address some of those issues. Still kind of in talks with the school on how we want to do that, and if that's a top priority for them.
And the school has a contract in place for somebody to do this work or the design work, or where do they stand, do you know?
So the school has their performance contract through Train. So right now I think they have an amendment to the Train contract that's under review, which would allow them to do these HVAC services through that. I don't want to misrepresent what they're doing over there, but that was my understanding from the last conversation I had with Mark Furtado. So they're working through that piece, and then that's for HVAC at multiple schools, and assuming everything works out, that would exhaust basically the remainder of their ESSER 3 funds.
So then, if the mayor decides to go forward with, the replacing the rest of the windows and doors and doing masonry repairs, that's probably then going to be the summer of '25.
Precisely.
Okay. All right. Then is there a motion to approve the bill for port construction?
Move to approve. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, so the future. Next Tuesday, I will be standing there. I've been invited to the Finance Committee to give them the pared-down version of our feasibility study for the Council on Aging. So I took a number of pages from the feasibility study and I put them into a PowerPoint, and I'm going to present that to the committee. Kelly Lee is going to be there with me to answer any questions on program they may have, but that is coming up in the future. Then the school building meeting, remember, is pushed back a week to avoid school vacation week, so that's the 28th, I
Yep.
believe. And that will be over at the high school. Don't expect that to be a particularly long meeting. And then March 6th is our next regular meeting, and your agenda says City Hall, but it is highly likely that KBA will be making a presentation on the public safety construction, and so we'll pay the bills first and then get to them by 6 o'clock. So stay tuned with Mason, but it is likely that will be moved over to the high school, because the Conservation Commission would want to be here at 6:30, and we certainly would be beyond 6:30 with actually that discussion. I think our hope is that we can get KBA to the point where they might be able to wrap up and write a report. So, that's the future. Any questions?
Nope.
Motion's in order to adjourn at 6:13.
Move to adjourn. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.